By the late 11th century BC, the Philistines were no longer migrants trying to survive on a new coast. They had become a settled, urban power. Their 5 cities were fortified, economically active, and connected to trade routes running between Egypt and the northern Levant. Grain moved through their territory. Caravans passed under their supervision. The coastal plain was stable, productive, and valuable. To their east, in the rugged highlands, a different political reality was taking shape. The Israelite tribes were beginning to organize beyond loose confederation. Population in the hills increased. Settlements multiplied. And with growth came pressure. Highland societies cannot expand indefinitely in narrow valleys. If they were to develop into something stronger, they would eventually have to push west, into Philistine-controlled territory. Point 1 of the earliest remembered clashes occurs near Aphek. Philistine forces advanced inland, confronting Israelite fighters attempting to push westward. The biblical tradition remembers it as a catastrophic Israelite defeat and the capture of the Ark of the Covenant. Behind the theological framing, however, the military situation is clear. The Philistines met their opponents on flat terrain, where disciplined infantry formations and battlefield coordination mattered far more than guerrilla familiarity with hills. The Highlanders were drawn into open engagement, and they lost decisively. After the victory, Philistine influence did not retreat back to the coast. Evidence suggests they positioned forces along key inland corridors, effectively monitoring and containing Highland expansion. As Israelite leadership centralized under Saul in the late 11th century BCE, conflict intensified again. Philistine garrisons appear to have been placed in strategic inland points. One of the most famous traditions emerges during this period, the duel between David and Goliath of Gath. Gath was one of the strongest Philistine cities. Its mention signals that the balance of power was shifting. By the early 10th century BC, Israelite forces were no longer purely defensive. David, a young shepherd, defeated Goliath by striking him in the forehead with a stone from his sling. David then used Goliath's own sword to kill him. David's later campaigns pushed westward, striking Philistine strongholds. Textual traditions describe the weakening of Philistine dominance and reduction of their ability to raid inland territories. Archaeological evidence at sites identified with Gath shows destruction layers around this period, though debates continue about exact dating. By the early 10th century BC, neither side had eliminated the other. The war between plain and hill ended in equilibrium. Two regional powers now faced each other. Their rivalry shaped the political landscape of the 10th century BC. Around 840 BC, the kingdom of Aram Damascus reached its peak under Hazael. Assyrian inscriptions mention him directly. So do Levantine sources. He was aggressive, expansionist, and deeply involved in southern politics. And his shadow reached the Philistine plain. At Tel Sophie, widely identified as ancient Gath, archaeologists uncovered a massive destruction layer dated to the late 9th century BC. The scale of the destruction is unmistakable: collapsed fortifications, burned debris, rapid abandonment. Gath never regained its earlier dominance. This is a turning point. For over a century, Gath had been the most militarily assertive member of the Pentapolis. After its destruction, the internal balance shifted. Ekron and Ashkelon gained relative prominence. The Philistines survived the blow, but they were weakened. At the same time, the political landscape to the east was changing. The northern kingdom of Israel expanded significantly under the Omride dynasty in the 9th century BC. Samaria became a powerful capital. Israel entered international coalitions, including the famous anti-Assyrian alliance recorded in the Kirk monolith of Shalmaneser III. Philistine cities, positioned along trade routes, could not remain neutral in such a volatile environment. Judah began asserting itself more aggressively. During the reign of Uzziah, traditionally dated to the mid-8th century BC, Judah expanded westward. While biblical texts often amplify royal achievements, the broader context fits a period of Judahite expansion and regional instability. Ashdod shows destruction and rebuilding phases in the same period. Whether directly attributable to Uzziah or to wider conflicts, the evidence supports a time of military disruption. The Philistines were now facing pressure from multiple directions. The Pentapolis model, autonomous cities cooperating, was resilient, but it was not designed for prolonged multi-front stress. Each city had to calculate its own survival strategy. The coastal plain, once the Philistines' greatest advantage, became increasingly exposed. Armies could march through it from north or south. Fortifications mattered more than ever. By the mid-8th century BC, the southern Levant was politically fragmented and militarized. Alliances shifted quickly. In 745 BC, the balance of power in the Levant changed permanently. A new king took the Assyrian throne, Tiglath-Pileser III. Unlike earlier Assyrian rulers who launched occasional western campaigns, Tiglath-Pileser restructured the empire into a permanent military administrative machine. In 734 BC, Tiglath-Pileser launched a major western campaign during what scholars call the Syro-Ephraimite crisis. The Kingdom of Israel Aramean kingdoms attempted to resist Assyrian expansion. The Philistine cities were drawn into this geopolitical storm. Assyrian annals mention Hanunu o Hanno of Gaza. When Assyrian forces advanced, Hanunu fled to Egypt rather than submit. Tiglath-Pileser captured Gaza and installed a compliant ruler. Hanunu was later restored after submission and tribute. Assyria preferred tribute over annihilation, if compliance was swift. Around 734 BCE, the ruler of Ashkelon, Metinti, appears in Assyrian records as a vassal. After his death, his successor Rukibtu attempted anti-Assyrian alignment. Assyria responded decisively. The city was subdued and brought firmly into the imperial system. We see a pattern. Local rulers tried to navigate between resistance and survival. Assyria removed those who miscalculated. The most dramatic confrontation came under Sargon II. In 711 BC, Ashdod rebelled. The Assyrian records name the local ruler Ashuri, who was removed by Assyria for disloyalty after rebellious network crushed. His brother Ahimiti was installed as a puppet. But a usurper named Yamoni led a revolt and sought support from Egypt. Sargon's response was swift. Assyrian forces marched into Philistine territory, besieged Ashdod, and crushed the rebellion. Yamoni fled, possibly toward Egypt, but was captured and handed over to Assyria. Not all cities resisted. Ekron became a loyal Assyrian vassal during the late 8th and early 7th centuries BC. Under Assyrian oversight, it expanded dramatically. The massive olive oil production complex discovered at Tel Mikni dates to this period. The Ekron royal inscription names, Ikausu, son of Pardi. Pardi is also mentioned in Assyrian records as a loyal vassal of Sennacherib. Ekron thrived economically, but under imperial supervision. In 701 BC, during the revolt of Hezekiah of Judah, the Philistine city of Ekron was caught in another regional conflict. Ekron's ruler Pardi remained loyal to Assyria, but anti-Assyrian factions within the city handed him over to Hezekiah. Sennacherib marched west. He defeated Egyptian and Nubian forces near El-Teker. He restored Pardi to the throne of Ekron and punished opposition leaders. The message was clear: Assyria determined who ruled Philistine cities. Now, the Pentapolis no longer functioned as an independent federation. The term Seren still existed locally. And for a time, under Assyrian dominance, some cities even reached economic peaks. But empires are not eternal, and when Assyria began to fracture in the late 7th century BCE, the Levant did not regain freedom. It faced something more final. After the death of Assyrian king Ashurbanipal, internal revolts and external coalitions weakened the empire. By 612 BC, Nineveh fell to a combined force of Babylonians. Assyria fragmented rapidly. For smaller Levantine states, this might have seemed like an opportunity, but it was not. A new empire rose immediately in its place. In 605 BC, Crown Prince Nebuchadnezzar II defeated the Egyptians at the Battle of Carchemish. Within a year, he was king of Babylon. And in 604 BC, he marched south into the Levant to secure the coastal corridor by conquering the Phoenician and Israelite cities. The Philistine cities were firmly captured by the Babylonian. Gaza survived somewhat longer, due to its strategic importance and proximity to Egypt. But it too passed firmly into Babylonian control. The Philistine identity as a distinct political entity disappears from Babylonian administrative texts. By the 6th century BC, the Philistines are no longer mentioned as a ruling people in imperial records. Their cities become administrative districts within larger empires. The word Philistine survived far longer than the people as a political power. The earliest known Greek use of the name appears in the 5th century BC. The historian Herodotus refers to the southern Levant as Syria Palestine, meaning Palestinian Syria. The word Palestine is widely understood to derive from the earlier Semitic term Pelashet, the coastal land of the Philistines. By Herodotus' time, the original Philistine political structure had already disappeared. The Greeks were using the name geographically, not ethnically. It referred broadly to the southern coastal Levant, not specifically to the old Pentapolis alone. The Romans adopted the Greek form and Latinized it as Palestina. However, the name became officially political much later. After the Bar Kokhba revolt in 132 CE, the Roman Emperor Hadrian reorganized the province of Judea and renamed it Syria Palestina. This was not about the ancient Philistines directly. By the 2nd century CE, the historical Philistines had been gone for over 700 years. The Greek and Roman terms do not mean. The Philistines survived into classical antiquity. There was a continuous Philistine ethnic identity and they mean that the regional name outlived the original people.